Yeah, look at that, man. It's like freaking like 1.8 mil steel. It's thick as shit. It's thicker than most MX5 owners. So, there was a Mazda, and it did stuff until it didn't. So we fixed it, and that worked until it didn't. So we fixed that until it wasn't. So we decided to fix it permanently. So it's pretty obvious that the Mazda power plant is not really going to work well for us. So we've got a solution which entails taking the heart of a Toyota Celsius and putting it into here. Roll 'em. Tony knows where we're going. Okay, so preliminary test bits have revealed that we do need to kind of add some clearance to the engine bay here. So on the left side, because we're talking about direction of flow of the vehicle, we cut it along this line here, right up to the edge, and then just squared it off. Now, I only took that corner out there because there's still some chassis stuff, so what I'm going to do is just roll it over, clean it up, and put a corner gusset in there. And over here is where the real drama was. So this car is obviously right-hand drive because we're in Australia, and so all I could cut with it was up to here and then across because I was worried about the steering shaft. I didn't want to chop that. So what we revealed was that there's a noggin on the back of the head that hits just here. Now the motor is going to have to go off center slightly by about 20 millimeters, and then it will be central in between the chassis rails, because for some reason the chassis rails in this car are not symmetric, which is rather curious. So I've read about people doing these swaps, and they've said that you have to cut and remake brake lines. I don't believe this is true, because this brake line here, coming to this, which goes to the rear, ran over the top of the steering shaft before. So all I did was unbolt it and sort of straighten it out, feed it under the fuel lines, and then round the back here. So there's heaps of clearance at the back of the head for that brake line to run. I've kept this here. We fitted the motor with that moved behind, and it doesn't need to move anywhere. So the brake line for the front right hand, which connects to here, normally runs over the top. Now, unfortunately, I damaged this brake line, so we're going to have to remake that anyway. But I'm going to punch a hole through here, which is in the wheel well, and run the brake line up through there. So we eliminate the need to actually make a brake line. We could have used the original brake line there. Apart from that, I've just rebent the fuel lines so that they come out where the chassis has the bend outs for clearance. So I think that's where they may have been originally on this car. This is NA. This is a what? I think this is an 89.
No, the body's 93. The harness, it's a hell of a Frankenstein. The harness is half NA8, half NBB. So yeah, there's about 3 different generations of body and wiring and nonsense in this car.
And then a UCF 11 Sora as well.
Yeah.
Sora Celsius.
Nissan VG30. Yeah, everything. Bit of everything. Parts car.
Yeah.
It's the way it worked in the 90s.
So this is our adapter plate. You may have seen it in a little bit of the other footage. So this is a generic plate. We are borrowing this one, and we may copy it because it's rather nice. It fits a lot of the bell housing patterns of different boxes. So yeah, I see that as a pretty good solution. We're about to test fit the motor again, You can see the wiring loom just down there. It unplugs from the body, but it doesn't unplug from the stuff that goes to the back, which is really odd. So that box usually fits up here. So what I'm actually going to do with it is run it in the top of the trans tunnel and then up over the top of this part here, and then around in front of this rusty brake booster, and then up over the top of the back. And then yeah, that should all fit. The charge system wiring for the alternator should be fine. That's going to reach because our alternator will end up about here. And yeah, so yeah, looking good so far. Looks like it's going to have no problems of it going to fit. Okay, so for the first stage of the engine mounts, I've made this. So it's a bit of scrap plate and a scrap bolt and a little ring there. Now the ring has come off of this. This is an old lower control arm. This was off my KE70 Corolla, which is the same as an A86. So I cut off one of these eyelets, knocked out the bushes, and we'll be using these bushes for engine mounts. Weld it to the plate, weld it to a bolt. So we're going to have a nylon bush going in there, and you can see how it is in line with the sump. So we've got sump clearance, and the other will happen on the other side, just like that. But that one's obviously sitting low because it's in a slot. So that's the slotted side, where usually the engine mount will go there. Okay, so I've done it this way instead of putting poly mounts on the engine like a lot of aftermarket ones do, so that we can put the shackle on the engine, put the engine in, and then probably through that hole there, we can feed this up and in and over and inside the engine mount, thus giving us more room for fitment when we're actually fitting the engine. Smarter, not harder. So I've got a transfer punch here. The punch has the same diameter, got a bunch of them here, and the punch has the same diameter as the hole you'd want to copy. So there's not much movement at all in there, and then it's got a little punchy end that you punch stuff with. So you just line up what you want and then chuck it in there, and you've got a hole, well, a little punchy thing anyway. So we've got, from the crank to the steering rack, we've got this tube, and this tube is 38 millimeters. It's just standard patio tube. So that will give me 20 millimeters of sump underneath the crankshaft, and then 20 mil, maybe 15 mil once it all settles to the steering rack. And that's only because we're doing our own sump. So if you come along the side here, if we put an edge on here, that's flat, so our gearbox is actually above the line of the chassis rail as well. So we're also going to end up with, from that, how much this heavy piece of metal is heavy, who would have thought? So we're also going to end up with about, where are we, counterweight there, so probably about 120 millimeters of sump minimum. So we're looking pretty good for sump space, and that's really good, and I'm really stoked because the sump was one of our worries, but it looks like it's going to come good. So the next stop is engine mounts. So the got our poly mounts that we made. And the poly mount goes up. Alright, I'll put it in from here. Up into there. And we just put the nut on here. So yeah, you might get better line of sight of it from here because you can see straight through. But you can see how much room we've got. So we've got a fair amount of room between the mount and the steel, and it looks like we're just gonna sneak in with the engine mount plate. So that's freaking awesome. I'm stoked as shit. So we're a little bit tight on the steering shaft, but we're going to modify the header slightly to fit that in. But otherwise, we have clearance everywhere. Really nice clearance everywhere as well.
Look at that there. We've actually got about maybe 5 mil.
Oh, to the shaft?
The shaft there.
Yeah, okay.
Which, I mean, isn't terrible. And if we modify that header just slightly, that's very much doable.
Yeah, so what I'll probably do is cut the pipe off at the head flange and then use like a 2-inch bend on it and then knock it in. So there'll be heaps of room for it, for the air expansion. Yeah, that's, I mean, the car's not designed to fit this engine in, so from what we had, what we're working with, it's yeah, it's going to work out not too bad. It's actually quite good.